Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History here on 12 Ounce Sports. And of course, Dingo TV, channel 217, and the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. This end of August 2024. And what that means, the dog days of summer are just about over. And that means fall is about to start. And with that comes not only college football, but the pennant races in Major League Baseball. And it comes upon an anniversary of a run by a team that we all know as a dynasty at certain times during their history. And then, of course, the New York Yankees. And back in the late 90s, right through to 2000, they definitely were a team to be reckoned with. 4 World Series championships in a 5-year run. And we thought it'd be fun to bring in an old friend of the show. He's been on the Captain Lou Extravaganza quite a few times talking baseball and hockey, but he's a big Yankees guy. So let's bring in from the 1420 Sports Bar podcast. He is Brent Radlinsky, and we're going to talk some Yankees. Brent, long time no talk. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, Lou. It has been a long time. We talked before the baseball season started. We talked about some hockey back then when the NHL playoffs were getting going, and it all turned out kind of as we all thought it kind of would with Florida winning. But no, good to be back in the show and talking some baseball, especially Yankees baseball. People don't like talking about it, but it's a thing.
Oh, it definitely is. And they're hot right now in this 2024 season. We'll talk about that towards the end of the show because you talk about history, and Aaron Judge is on a record-breaking pace in the American League again, and boys coming on like gangbusters. But what we want to talk about here, you know, like with the Tigers earlier, I talked about it on the show, and it's been 40 years since they've won a World Series.
The Roar of 84.
Can't believe it's been that long. And you know, it's crazy. I know it's been 15 years for the Yankees, but, you know, they had quite a run in the late 90s. But I want to start it out by talking about 1995. And it's significant, Brent, because that was the first time they were in the playoffs since like 1981. And for a storied franchise like the Yankees, man, that just seems like an eternity.
There was a lot of lean years in Yankee land. I don't think people realize that. If you watch some old YouTube videos of the Yankees at Yankee Stadium in the 80s and then in the early 90s, like when the Blue Jays were winning, Baltimore was a competitive team once they moved into Camden Yards and the rest how it went. The Yankees were they were the redheaded stepchild of the American League East. There's no getting around that, and they were getting beat left and right, and records were like they were having record losing seasons, and then no one was going to games in the Bronx. They actually Steinbrenner at one point was threatening to move the team to New Jersey because of the rundown area that was the Bronx, and everything else, and then it just kind of they decided to stick around there, and they went in a bit of an uptick, and like you were saying, 95. They finally got a shot because Toronto won in 92 and 93. And like I said earlier, Baltimore had a pretty good run there, and they kind of got Richie Garcia a few times in the days with the umpire. We'll get to that in probably half a minute, but it's the turning point for I think that the Yankee dynasty as they became was, like you were saying, that 1995 season when they ended up losing the Seattle Mariners in one of the greatest playoff the divisional series of probably ever, and then they lost in 5 games. The Yankees were up 2 games to nothing. The Showalter era, and there was that hit by was it Edgar Martinez, and then Griffey scored, and the whole on and on it went. Yeah. And Griffey said, and actually a lot of the Mariners have said that's the greatest base route running ever. Yeah. It was he did it perfectly, and like he's a Hall of Famer, obviously. But losing that series was probably a blessing in disguise for the Yankees. If you want to look back, and hindsight's 2020, we can make up whatever we want in between our own ears, Lou. But the thing is when you have a shot like that, and they didn't get it done. They had a great team, and there's some guys coming up they knew, but the missing link was maybe Joe Torre, and they got rid of Showalter, and Torre was a bit of a gamble. He was with St. Louis for over the years on, and Torre was a bit of a gamble that nobody really thought of, and the Clueless Joe thing was on the headlines of the New York Times and the Daily News or whatever it was, and no one had much faith in him and how it all went down, and it turns out it turned out pretty good because if Showalter wins a round, who knows? You stick around with the old team, and you never know what could happen. But Steinbrenner and the rest of the crew decided to make a change, and well, as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah, and that series, you talk about how great of a series it was. The Yankees scored the least amount of runs in a game in that series, and that was 4 in game 3. I mean, you had games like 9-6, 7-5, 11-8. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you talked about it, 6-5. That was no place for a nervous person in that series, especially if you were a pitcher.
The Kingdome and the old Yankee Stadium, they were it was different. I don't know if you ever been to the Kingdome, but it was a different place. And I remember watching that back in '95. I was in a small town in Saskatchewan playing junior hockey back then. It's a long time. Geez, I'm getting old, Lou. But it's one of those things you remember where you were especially in October. You're a baseball guy like myself, and you remember where you were when you're watching those games, and especially when it comes to October, and you see those moments, and you remember Griffey scoring in the dog pile that was at home plate, and on it went. How loud that building got. Like I'm just like I said, I was in Saskatchewan, which is a couple provinces and one state down over here, but no matter how bad, and this is still to this day, no matter how good or bad the Yankees were at that point, which they had like I said, they had it earlier. They weren't very good, but whenever the Yankees lose, there's a big rejoice. And I've always said this, that baseball's, and we'll get into a little bit later, but baseball's always better when the Yankees are involved. This is my opinion, because nothing brings two people together like the dislike of a third. And that's and that's what the Yankees have become over the years.
I love that. And you mentioned it, they got Joe Torre, and in '96, I was kind of surprised by it, Brent, because he didn't really do anything in St. Louis. He didn't do much in Atlanta. I believe he was a manager there. Yeah. And, but hey, he's like Phil Jackson and, gosh, I can't remember the guy from the Lakers already. I forgot. Boy, oh boy, you talk about getting up in years, you forget certain things. But he managed the Eagles, and I think that's just what they needed. And, I look at that 96 team too, Brent. I just happened to, I was bringing up, their batting averages in that, and they had 5 guys over 300. And they had another guy with Joe Girardi at 294. I mean, talk about an incredible lineup that year.
Well, that's the thing that I think gets lost in today's baseball. Me and you both, a little bit of gray in the beards and everything else. We talk about it, but guys, getting on base is so important, and batting average. I don't know why it has gone the way of the dodo bird and getting guys on base. And the Yankees proved that. Like you remember when that season first started in '96, there was rumors they were going to get rid of Mariano and they were going to get rid of Jeter, and because they weren't too keen on him, and Tony Fernandez, ex-Blue Jay great, probably one of the greatest Blue Jays ever, top 5 anyways. He ended up getting hurt, so they kind of said, well, let's crap or get off the pot with Jeter, and they stuck with him, and then they stuck with, because Mariano and Jeter, I think, were going to be going over to Seattle. I can't remember who the trade was for, but it was one of those deals of well, maybe we shouldn't. And then they stuck with the 2 young guys, because Mariano was a starter back then, and then it just kind of all worked out. And then Mariano wasn't the starter that first year, but that team, the thing that comes to mind when you talk about those Yankee teams back in the late mid to late 90s, and then even into 2009, when 15 years ago, like you said, the thing that comes to mind about them, and relentless, not just on the field, but off the field with Steinbrenner, not being afraid to spend a couple of bucks here and there. And I look over your shoulder and I see that McCarty jersey. Yeah, he didn't get paid a bunch of money, but you think of those Detroit Red Wings teams, same thing. Ownership was relentless, going out and getting the players to make it happen. And you can say you buy a championship and everything else, but people fail to realize that when Steinbrenner really started spending money, they weren't winning a whole bunch. And that's what's kind of funny about that thing. Like I get in some arguments. Well, you only buy World Series. Like, well, they tried to, and that's when they weren't winning. Because you can't build a culture through a checkbook. And I've always thought that. And those Yankee teams early, they put in a piece here, put a piece in here, there. But you think a lot of those guys, they played in the minor leagues together, and they found a way to get something together, and they got it going. And you look at those teams, and a lot of guys, you look at the guy who caught the final out, and we'll get into that in half a second, I'm sure. But who's Charlie Hayes? Like really big pitcher. He caught that final out in the game 6 against Atlanta, that foul ball that everybody knows about. And then, but who's Charlie Hayes? Where is he now? But those plug and play guys that the Yankees would find. Obviously the superstars that they brought in all the time didn't hurt. Like it never hurts to have really good players on your team. But to me, for those Yankee teams, it was the obviously the core 4, but it was the plug and play guys that made the difference a lot of nights through that dynasty.
One player that I don't think gets enough credit in this run that they had, Brent, is Tino Martinez. I mean, he would lead the home run with 28 home runs. He had 117 RBIs in 96. I mean, he was one of the unsung heroes, I believe. And he really, was a leader on that team.
But you look at all the like the Derek Jeter day. I was lucky enough to go there in 2000. That's 10 years ago now too. But in 2014 when Jeter retired, and then even in 2013 when Mariano retired, I was lucky enough to go to both of those events at Yankee Stadium back then. And Martinez wasn't a big name. Yeah, he's the great Bambino, as they called him on the radio and everything else, and on it goes. But he was never the guy that got the big spotlight because you had the Jeters, you had the Riveras, you had Clemens later on, but you had a guy like Tino Martinez that was just there, and he's always at the forefront of all of those big events. Even on Saturday there, they had their old timers day. They don't play the game anymore, which I think a lot of the players are happy to not have to go there and embarrass themselves a little bit because you get a little bit old and everything else. But it's Martinez was around. He was around for a long time. Yeah, he didn't get that I think that 4th one because he went to I think Tampa. I think it was.
Yeah.
But he was always around. He was a leader, and he was an ex Seattle Mariner. I remember actually watching him play for the Calgary Cannons just up the road here when I was younger. So in AAA in the Pacific Coast League, and Martinez was one of those silent leaders that was just around, and it shows how important he was to that whole franchise and that whole thought process that Joe Torre, that winning attitude that, it's because the Yankees don't have names in the back of their jerseys, but the name on the back is more important than the name in the front. And Martinez is one of those guys that was just, we're pulling in the same direction here. Let's try to win something. We got something special going on here. And I think that was one of the easy things is you get not easy because winning's hard no matter what, but you get guys that are pulling in the same direction. It makes it a lot easier to say, we're here for the greater good, because the numbers in the back of your baseball card don't mean a damn thing if you don't have a championship. And if you get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then some of those guys have 5, man, nobody can take that away from you. Like nobody.
So they get to the World Series in 96. Of course, they had to go through Baltimore in the championship series, and I believe they had to play Texas in the opening round in the divisional series. So you got to be flying high as a Yankees fan, and then all of a sudden you're outscored like 16-1 or something in the first 2 games, and you got to be thinking, holy hell, what is going on here?
Well, that was the thing. Like, it was all set up because we talked earlier on about a little bit about Richie Garcia made one of the most egregious calls in baseball history. With Jeffrey Mayer reached over the fence, and Richie Garcia's right in the outfield there. And I don't know how he blew that call as an umpire myself. I'm like, that's a bad call. But that's it. All worked out and everything else for the Yankees to get the World Series against Atlanta. And that Atlanta team, like we can talk all we want about the Yankee team, how great they were, but man, those Atlanta teams, squandered opportunities over the years.
Oh my goodness!
Like the best pitching staff almost ever assembled. Like it's just couldn't put it together. Couldn't get enough wins. Couldn't get a hit here and there. But yeah, those first 2 games. Losing at home at the old Yankee Stadium, I think by a combined score of 16 or 22-1 or something, just disgusting how bad it was. And it was like, oh geez, then like as a baseball fan or as a Yankee fan, you get thinking, well, you know what, the Yankees haven't been here in how many years, in 19 years or whatever it was, 18 years, and then they go, you know what, this is who we are. We got this far. Atlanta's they've been doing everything for how long? Because that dynasty started, I think, in '91, where they. Do you call it a dynasty? Because they didn't do a whole bunch of winning. I mean, you win the American League East or National League East 100 times in a row. Is it a dynasty? I don't know. You got to win the big picture. It's like they were the king of a third world country, I guess you could say. But it's just Go
If
ahead, Lou,
that's the
sorry.
case, then you would call the Dodgers right now a dynasty in present age. They've won one World Series and it was COVID.
There's
I mean,
COVID
they
area.
won their
Yeah.
division 100 times, but they can't get to the big
Don't
dance.
mean nothing. Yeah.
And I don't even want to. I don't even want to hear about the can bashing against the Astros because they weren't hitting the cans in Dodger Stadium.
That's right.
So don't even go there with me on
Means
that one. I
nothing.
hate that when people do that.
It means nothing.
But what's funny though, with that team in '96, though, getting back to the Yankees,
Yeah.
you know, that Game 3, they took out Boggs, they took out O'Neill, you know, they put in Strawberry, and and I forgot that Cecil Fielder was still on the team. They left him in there, put him at first base.
At first
Crazy.
base, yeah. And that was like I said, like the relentlessness of that organization to grab a player here. Like Strawberry was on the back end of his career, obviously. Like his best days were far behind him. But he was a bat. Like it was a little intimidating. A guy can run into a hit now and then here and there. But just the way that they came back in that series, and you remember the Jim Leyritz home run, and on it goes. And then you go to the deciding Game 6, the Joe Girardi triple that was misplayed in center field by a young Andrew Jones playing center field. Like he was only 19 at the time. And just the way it all worked out, and they got some timely pitching against some very, very all Hall of Fame kind of guys. And that, I don't want to say the Yankees won that World Series as much as Atlanta lost that World Series. Because if you go home 2-0 and up 2-0 especially, and you can't close it out by getting one, there is a problem there, because back when there was 2-2, 1-1-1, and they set themselves up to succeed. I think Atlanta lost that World Series more than the Yankees won that World Series. But that's when the Yankee lore, the core four, and it all started to come together back in '96, and that's when the Derek Jeter, that's when he Rookie of the Year, and on it goes. I mean, that's when it all started for him. But it comes back to those guys that they had that were just solid players. And adding a guy like Paul O'Neill never hurts. And O'Neill was one of the greats. I think he's an all-time great personally. He's one of those other all-time great Yankee, not an all-time great player, but he was an all-time great Yankee. And the way he played the game, he played hard. I think that man hated losing more than he liked winning. Like you win, you go for a steak and a beer and whatever it is. But O'Neill was the kind of guy, when he failed or when he struck out 3 times, remember him kicking his helmet and beating up Gatorade cans and everything else. That man hates losing more than he likes winning, and that got contagious in the Yankee clubhouse. And you remember after Game 2, like you said, that they got blown out like bad at home. Yeah. On and on it goes. Steinbrenner wasn't too shy to call out Torrey about what's going on here. And Torrey was probably on a pretty short leash at that point. If the Yankees don't win that World Series, because they get there, great, fantastic. If the Yankees don't win that World Series, Lou, I'm almost going to guarantee you that Torrey isn't back for the '97 season.
I agree. And
because he was nuts back then. He was nuts. How many times he fired Billy Martin?
Absolutely right. You're right. And that's a great point, because he had such a trigger when it came to managers. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, they probably would have brought Stump Merrill back for all I know.
Yeah, again, who knows? Yeah, just crazy how often he would just and like you gotta love. No, you don't. I think Steinbrenner's a bit of a moron, but it's one of those things. Yeah. It's one of those things. But you gotta. He was always trying. That was the thing. But sometimes trying was a bit of a hindrance to the rest of the organization, because a lot of times players don't go to a team because they're making the most money. They want to be comfortable with their manager and everything else. And then if it's just a revolving door of guys in and out every year, well, what are we doing here?
Well, before we go to break, I want to kind of remind everybody who won the MVP of that World Series. And it's funny because a lot of folks that aren't Yankees fans probably don't even remember this guy's name. John Wetland got 43 saves in the regular season. He saved all 4 games and got the MVP. That's crazy.
ex-Montreal Expo John Welly.
Yeah.
How many Montreal Expos players were sprinkled along those teams over the
Free
years and
reign,
everything
baby.
else? And, yeah, he was great, and he got all four saves, got the MVP. He tried to blow Game 6, but he figured a way to get it. And then, like I said, the rest is history. Wetland was a great pitcher, and everybody always thinks it's Mariano, but there was a lot of guys coming out of that Yankee bullpen over the years that wasn't just like obviously Mariano's the greatest ever, but
yeah,
there's a lot of guys that came out of that bullpen all the time. That was it was fun to watch, and it was and that's the key to most baseball teams, especially nowadays. Everybody's throwing 140 miles an hour. Is that if you're strong in the bullpen and you can have a get it down to a 6-inning game, and that's what the Yankees did. They used to do that, and it was great to watch.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go to one I think was more than likely the best Yankees team of all time, that 98 team with 114 wins or whatever, some crazy amount. You're watching Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History right here on 12 Ounce Sports and Dingo TV, channel 217.
Need tickets to that next event? Well, at 12 Ounce Sports, we've got them with soccer anywhere in the world. Tickets to any venue, any sport. Want to go to NCAA or NFL football matches? We've got them.
Yeah.
Baseball at every level. Every Power 5 matchup is available. Don't forget, costumes and paint are optional. What's that? You want to go to Broadway? We have those too. Want to jam out? Every concert, every artist. That's right, at 12 Ounce Sports, we've got the tickets for less. 12ozsports.com/tickets. That's 12ouncesports.com/tickets.
Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History here on 12 Ounce Sports and Dingo TV, channel 217. Brent Radlinsky from the 1420 Sports Bar podcast joining us as we take a look back at that Yankee dynasty of the late 90s into 2000. 4 World Series championships in 5 years, 6 straight trips to the playoffs. We're going to skip 97, obviously, because they didn't win the World Series. We like to talk about that. And we'll get into the 98 season. But I wanted, kind of on a side note, this always brings a chuckle to me. In the draft, they drafted Drew Henson. And he did that because George Steinbrenner, if you remember, did that because he was an Ohio State guy. And Ohio State couldn't beat Michigan in football. And Henson was the quarterback. So they made sure they signed him and took him away from Michigan. So they couldn't.
I didn't know that. I learned something. A little wrinkle in my brain tonight, Lou. Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
That's a little bit of lore. The only problem with Henson is he couldn't hit a curveball. So he didn't last too long. Then I think he went back and played for the Cowboys.
Yeah, you talk about that 98 team, 100, like you said, 114 and 48, and on it goes. And then, like I said, relentlessly, they didn't win in 97. They lost to the Cleveland Indians. They were the Cleveland Indians back then, now the Guardians, obviously. But they got the relentlessness of the organization. Like, we can't waste our, and that's one thing that when you have a championship window, no matter what sport it might be, like we talked about your Red Wings earlier on, you have to take advantage of it because you don't know when you're going to get another one. And I think that's one thing that Steinbrenner and Torrey and Cashman and the rest of whoever was in charge those days, they said, you know what, we got this great core here. We have to take advantage of it because you don't know when it's going to happen again. And then the one acquisition, and it's a little bit of foreshadowing here, but when they went out and got Scott Brocious from the Oakland A's, who kind of stung them 2 times over the playoffs, and Brocious, and actually it's funny story. For some reason, like, my brother doesn't have a hateful bone in his body, but my brother hates Scott Brocious with all of his being, and I don't know why. Like, when we go to New York and he sees a picture of Brocious up on the wall jumping up and down to the 98 team, he says, I hate that guy, and he has no reason behind it, but he just hates Scott Brocious. So it's kind of funny there. But like, they went out and got Brocious that year, and he ended up being the World Series MVP. But it was that commitment to winning that they had, and then to go out and win 114 games and have that swagger and say, you know what, one's not enough. Let's see what we can do. And it was a commitment to the fans and the, wanting to win and everything else. But it's you wonder, like, why more teams? I mean, it's money, it's finance, I guess, but winning breeds winning, and winning brings more people into your building. I know everybody can't spend $200 million, and the Yankees were spending a little bit. It wasn't $200 million back then, obviously, because now one player makes how much money a year? $70 million in Ohtani's place. But it's like that commitment to winning and that commitment to excellence and that commitment that they had to go out and grab a few, because they knew that they had an opportunity to win some, and they did. And you got to commend Steinbrenner and the like I said earlier on, for doing something like that, because that team was unbelievable. They were 114 wins. I think a couple of years later that Seattle had 116, but 114 wins. I mean, like, we're gonna have some 100-team wins this year, but 114 is a big number. That's a big number. Like, if you win 2 out of 3, which is hard to do throughout a baseball season, that's 108.
Yeah.
Winning 2 out of that's tough. Like, that's tough. Boy. You're gonna have a bad weekend here and there, but 114, that's impressive.
I just look at these win totals that the pitchers had that year. Pettit was 16, David Wells 18-4, Cone 20-7, Hideki Arabu 13-9, Orlando Hernandez 12-4, and then you look down to Ramiro Mendoza 10-2. I mean, boy, it was clicking that year, eh?
Like, just like you say a lot of those names. How many Hall of Famers are on that? Like David Cone, like to me, he's one of the greatest. He's one of the greatest pitchers ever. Like, it's right in my wheelhouse, right in my era. Like those days in Kansas City. Then he went to the Mets, and then he went to the Jays for a little bit, and then obviously with the Yankees. And I think he ended up being with Boston or whatever. Who cares?
He had a cup of coffee with the Tigers too, I think.
I didn't know that. So he kind of maybe wore his welcome around the league, but he was such a good pitcher and then a great leader, and he ended up winning himself a few championships and now he's got a broadcasting career with the Yankees. Like, winning puts a few dollars in your pockets, and that's like Coney was so good and so solid, and then he was just added that. Like, every time that Cone took the mound, there was just a sense of calmness. I thought, like, he was not as good as Greg Maddux, but there was always he wasn't throwing 190 miles an hour. He was just out there. You knew you were going to get, and everything else. And Cone was such a good pitcher, and Wells had a bit of that bite to him that people like to remember. That one time he went to took the mound with Babe Ruth's hat on. Bought for $80,000 or whatever it was, and he had that little bit of New York bite to him, and the Bronx kind of a snarl and everything else. And he was a great acquisition, and like, it just they went out and they got those guys, and I think that it was so big, not just. And then, like you said earlier about all these guys like that, and that's the biggest thing about championship coaches and managers, whatever sport you might be. You can have all these great players, but if they're not all rolling in the same direction, because egos, these athletes, they got egos no matter what, and that's how they become great athletes. You got to have a bit of a swagger to your walk and everything else, and to have a guy like Torrey, who was a calming influence. You think later on when they brought Don Zimmer in, the same thing, because Zim was around for how many years? So he could. Those two guys could basically calm the waters and say, you're just another player here. We'll get somebody else here if you don't like it. And I think that was one of the greatest things like about that Yankee dynasty, was the way that Torrey was able to rein it all in and get guys to go in the same direction, because they weren't making podcast money by any means, Lou, but it was right. They were making good dough, and to get those guys to roll in the same direction, and the egos, and to leave the ego at the door. I know that sounds very cliche, but that was the thing with all these guys, because Steinbrenner wanted a shiny new toy every year. Like, everybody who was a free agent, Steinbrenner, let's get him. Because they remember the one year they even brought Canseco in for God knows what. He was that shiny new toy, and it was one of those things, and it seemed to work. But yeah, that 98 team, man, 114 wins. That's something else.
Before we get into the World Series, I want to ask you your thoughts on a guy this guy was always one of my favorite Yankees, was Bernie Williams. Loved watching him play. He was a Tiger killer, but a lot of them were back then, but just loved his style. I just loved everything about his play.
Number 51, Burn, baby, burn. I think he doesn't get nearly enough recognition. I know they talk the core four and everything else, but without Bernie, they don't win nothing. Bernie was so smooth, so good, so relaxed, so clutch hits all the time, left, right, center. Bernie, the way he played the field, everything. Bernie was, I think, I think most Yankee fans will think the same way. He was the MVP most seasons. Like he was so good, so relaxed, just such a great, not a good player, a great player. And he doesn't get the same recognition. He's because he's a better player in Posada. He's just as good as Jeter. Pettit pitched every X amount of days, and so like he's better than Pettit, in my opinion. Like without Bernie Williams, that team does not win anything without Bernie in the lineup. He was that good. I
agree, and it's just I just wanted to take a minute to talk about him because I just always loved his style of play.
So smooth.
Oh, for sure. So so they go into the World Series in '98, Brent, and they play the Padres, which again we talked about the Braves. Hard to believe they couldn't win. They had that unbelievable lineup. The Padres were 98-64 that year, but it just seemed like it was like the Yankees playing the Columbus
Bad News Bears. Yeah,
just they got a 7 spot in Game 1. And then they went into Game 2, and it was just like, oh my goodness, wow! That not even it. It was almost an embarrassment.
Well, the thing is about that World Series, like there was a pitch in that Tino Martinez we talked about earlier on that may or may not have been a strike. It was a strike.
Yeah,
that shit was on a 2-2 count, and the next pitch went into Never Neverland. I don't think it's landed across the street over at Stan's Bar and Grill, but he hit that thing a ton, and all of a sudden it's 7-0, and the rest is history. But that team wasn't losing. Like they won 4 straight, and one of the most I don't want to say. Downtrodden World Series, but nobody gave because the San Diego Padres play in San Diego, and it's just who they are, and it's just whatever. It's just on TV, so you watch it. And it was one of those things. The Padres could play that series and the 98 100 times, and the Yankees win it 100 times out of 100.
Yeah,
they had some great pitching, like unbelievable pitching, and then Hoffman was in the bullpen on the back end, and Langston was on that team, another Montreal Expo back in the day. Man, they're sprinkle everywhere, the old Expos, but it's that team was just that good, and they weren't losing no matter what, and they just added, like I said, Brocious was the MVP that year, and he hit one into left center in Game 3, I think it was, and as soon as it went off his bat, it was kind of like in the 2001 World Series that they ended up losing to Arizona. We'll talk about that a little bit, but it's Brocious had that energy and everything else, and he was a great acquisition, and he knew his role there, and it was they inserted, they probably paid him a ton. I don't know what they paid him back then, but they inserted the right guys here and there. And they had their core. They had the Bernies. They had the Tinos. They just had to get this guy here. But you talk about other guys that they had, and other pitchers that they had that were just, okay, well, it worked. But the managing of personalities, like we said, it was by Torre. It was, I don't think there's ever been anything like it in my lifetime to have all those guys that you just have to find a way to make it all work.
Yeah, and it just, I do feel a little sorry for the Padres because, of course, in '84 they ran into that Tigers team that was, started out 35-5, and they were so loaded with talent. And I know they got a win in that World Series, but I mean they were not quite as outmatched as they were in '98. But I'll tell you what, I felt bad for Padres fans because the 2 World Series appearances they had, they just got absolutely pummeled.
See, that's a weird thing to me because I've been to San Diego a couple of times to go with some Padres some weekends, and why they can't put it together there, because I tell you what, if someone's giving me $15 million here to play here or there, I'm going to San Diego. It is fantastic. The stadium's fantastic, all of it. Like I don't understand the ins and outs of why they can't put a winner together. And actually, they're having a very good season this year. Despite losing Juan Soto and everything else to the Yankees, but that's like they got a playoff shot, but why San Diego? Like we've only talked about them losing twice because it's all they've ever done in their franchise history, and that's got to be tough to be a Padres fan.
Oh boy, for sure. So they win the World Series, and then we get to the off season. And do you remember where you were when they made the trade for Roger Clemens?
Yeah, it was one of those things. 'Cause Clemens had some really, really good years, and like we're infiltrated with the Toronto Blue Jays around here all
Sure.
the time, right? And
Yeah.
then you're thinking, geez, you know what, Clement? Okay, yeah, yeah. And then I got thinking, why? Like the first thing that came to my head was why. Like
Yeah.
Clemens was on the back end, not the back end of his career, but it was like, well,
Felt like it.
Wells is still pretty serviceable, obviously, and he seemed like he seemed like he really quite liked playing with the Yankees and everything else. And you don't want to upset the clubhouse and bringing in an alpha male like Roger Clemens. My first thought was why.
Yeah.
That was my first thought, and then it turned out obviously turned out pretty good, but.
Yeah.
Clemens had some he had a couple Cy Youngs and everything else with the Jays, but I still thought why was my biggest thought was
Sure.
I don't think that I don't think they needed to do it. I don't think that was going to change the outcome of is he 2 more wins, 3 more wins than Wells? Who knows, right? That was my biggest thought was why, and then bringing in an attitude like Clemens. I mean, obviously I've never met the guy, but just the aura and the walk that he had about him. My biggest thought, Lou, honest to God, it was like, why? Like, what's that?
I mean, I like David Wells. I liked his bulldog mentality. Again, like I said, him and Bernie Williams were my 2 favorite Yankees. I mean, I'm not a Yankees fan, but when I watched him, I liked him the most. But that being said, 2 of my favorite players, well, obviously I was growing up when he started pitching, I loved watching Roger Clemens pitch. Just
it was unbelievable. Like you watch those nights, that 20 strikeout night in Fenway. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and when he came on in Boston, in the 80s, and he just it was generational talent, and so I could see why the Yankees went after him. I'm like you, I was surprised, but boy, you're right, it paid off dividends for them.
Yeah, it never hurts to have a Hall of Fame arm on your bench by any means, or a guy that's going in every 5th or 6th day. That never hurts. Like I'm not saying that because like as good as Cohen was, Clemens was just that much better, right? You knew you would get 7-8 innings out of him and leave, and he would shorten the game himself, not like how the bullpens are now. Clemens would go out and overpower people, and he was one of the last power pitchers of that era, like because you remember how obviously the Atlanta pitching staff that they had, they were crafty guys like Maddox and Smoltz and everything else. They were just crafty pitchers, and Tom Glavine. Like out of the 3, Glavine doesn't get the respect because he was so good. Hockey player too, Tom Glavine, but one of those guys. But bringing Clemens out every 5th or 6th day, and the mentality he had, he was a winner. Like he didn't mind getting gritty and doing things he had to do to win ball games. And he was, he just added to a team that won 2 out of the last 3 World Series, and it seemed to have worked a little bit. Yeah,
and it felt like growing up in the 70s as a Tigers fan. The Tigers were so bad; they weren't even relevant. It was like watching a team, it almost like it wasn't fair. But I watched that team in '99 coming off such a hellacious year. They were must-see TV because they were that good, Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, and that's like I said earlier. Nothing brings 2 people together like the hatred of a third, and that was the thing. And then I said for years, and the same thing with the like in hockey up here, the Leafs. Everybody hates the Leafs, but when it's on TV, people watch. And same with the Yankees. When the Yankees are rolling, ratings are up, and that's on both sides. People saying, well, man, we hope they lose. And the Yankees didn't. They weren't doing a whole bunch of losing back then. And it was like that playoff season. I think they went 11-1 in the playoffs. Yeah. 1 loss over the time. Like it was like every night there's come and win, which ends up to be not must see TV, but to roll through that. To probably the last of the Braves era in '99. There, they just rolled through them 4 straight again. Like to win a World's I said earlier, winning's tough. But to roll through the other league's champion 4 straight 2 years in a row, I don't think you'll ever see that again.
Never. That is such a great point, Brent. I'm glad you brought that up. Again, this Atlanta Braves team, I don't know, we can beat it, beat a dead horse, but they, to me, had the best starting rotation of anybody in my lifetime.
In mine, for sure. Like for
I
sure.
mean, I know the Orioles had that one year where they had 4 20-game winners, but you mentioned it, Glavine, Smoltz, Maddox. I mean, my goodness, I never would have thought that they
Steve
would have swept
Avery
the
was a hell of
league.
a pitcher. Like
Avery
you
was
think how
awesome.
Avery's the number
yeah.
one on most teams back then.
Yeah.
And like their bullpens with John Rocker and Roller and Mark Wohlers, everything else, like it was obviously a detriment. But man, oh man, to win that main division, I think that's maybe me and you should produce it, but the 30 for 30, make me a couple of bucks on this thing, Lou. But the big team that never could, the Atlanta Braves. Like honestly, like just to get, I think when they get the one World Series, like holy cow.
And
with how with that pitching style, how do you only have the one World Series? Like
I don't know. I don't know. And again, you look at the Dodgers; they're heading that way, but they didn't have they don't. I mean, they had pitching right now, but they're always banged up. These guys were healthy. Oh,
like Maddox wasn't throwing 85. No, he didn't throw hard enough to hurt his arm. Like it's crazy to think that. Like it was just absolute insanity. But anyways, we digress. We'll talk off air how to make some money off the Braves' misfortune in the 90s.
There you go. And I look at this World Series too. You look at I think it was game 3. I'm just pulling it up right now because I remember a guy that is playing for the Mean Machine right now in one of the Michigan penitentiaries. Chad Curtis had a couple of home runs. Knobloch had one for the Yankees. My goodness, it's just like, are you kidding me?
And that was just like you said, like they just would reload. And Knobloch, if you remember, he came up with a bad case of the yips at second base. He couldn't throw to first base, and I think even you at our age can do that now. We can still figure out how to do that, but Knobloch, and who's that broadcaster that Knobloch threw it into the stands? I can't remember his name. ESPN guy. He hit this guy's mom. I'll remember.
Oh, I can't
talking about Oberman. He hit Oberman's mom in the head from second base. But Knobloch was such a great Minnesota Twin. If you remember that back then, like he was a really good player for those Twins teams. Like on the back end of that thing. And the Yankees, like I said, they had some great teams, and Chad Curtis was some issues and grievances there, like a few other guys, like Jim Leyritz when the big hit in '96, he got himself in some trouble with the law and everything else, and it's just. But the way and that's why I don't like the narrative that the Yankees were buying World Series, because they don't get me wrong, they spent money, they did 100%. But the thing is that they had a lot of guys that were just there for a year. A lot of guys in the minor league system there for a year, and the culture of winning. I think that's it's very important. Yeah, you can spend all the money you want, like I said earlier, but a checkbook, it's tough to just throw a checkbook and win a championship. You can't just do it. You have to have a core. You think about like I said earlier on with your Detroit Red Wings, that grind line. Like you can't just manufacture that. There has to be a thought process of what we're trying to do here, and I think that's what the Yankees did. And I think it's funny how the two eras with the Red Wings and the Yankees are pretty much at the same point. Yeah, they were both teams spending money, but they were the same kind of mentality of how they were going to do things. I think the two franchises at that point in time are very comparable.
100%. They had a lot of homegrown talent, but yet they went out and got the pieces they needed, and it proved to be successful. We're going to take 45 seconds, come back, and we're going to talk about the 2000 season and then jump to now with the New York Yankees. You're watching Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History here on 12 Ounce Sports and Dingo TV, channel 217. Welcome back, everybody, to Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History here on 12 Ounce Sports and Dingo TV channel 217. Again, joined by Brent Radlinsky of the 1420 Sports Bar podcast. Check them out. Great baseball content. And of course, once hockey season starts, we'll get knee deep into pucks as well, as that's always a great time of year. That's coming here shortly in a couple of months. Brent, we're talking the New York Yankees, their dynasty coming to a close in that decade, the year 2000. And they coming off back-to-back World Series wins, dominant, as we talked about before the break. Coming into the end of that 2000 season, I think they lost like 7 in a row and 14 out of 17, kind of on a skid. And I wonder maybe if you were a little worried going into that postseason that something just might not be right.
Let's not sugarcoat this. They lost 15 out of 18. They only had 87 wins. So you got to think that's a 27 win differential from a couple of years prior too.
Yeah.
That's a lot less wins, Lou. But yeah, you get thinking like maybe it's over because all good things must come to an end, which is sad for the sports fan like me and you are. Like it can go on forever, but it doesn't. But thing is, they had that core. Right. And they had guys that were like, okay, we can still win. We still got a team to put together. Guys get a little bit older and everything else, but they still had that core of guys that could go and do things. And that's, to me, that's when Jeter, they named Jeter the captain in 98 or 99, whatever it was. And I think the captain in baseball is a bit ridiculous, but that's another story for another day because most teams don't have captains. And for some reason, the Yankees feel the need to do that, but whatever, sells t-shirts, so whatever. But it's, I just think that they had the Jeter came out a little bit, and that was his time to shine on the big stage against the Mets. And that's the big thing. If you watch that Jeter documentary, The Captain, that was on Netflix or HBO, whatever it was. So many streaming services, I can't keep track of them. Right. Life because she takes care of that for me. It's on this one, that one, whatever. But like he said, we knew we weren't going to lose that. Like if they got there, they weren't going to lose to the Mets because they're the Mets. And that swagger that he brought and that confidence. He's a Michigan kid, like yourself. There was a bit of a swagger and I don't want to say arrogance, but a cockiness, I guess you could say, and it really came out in that 2000 season with Jeter, and he ended up being the MVP, and Piazza was nothing to the rest of it. It was one of those things like we're not losing this World Series. We're going to win this whole thing, and no one's going to stop us. No one's stopping us. That's what we have. We have the best team in baseball. We're the best pitching, not the best pitching staff. We have a very solid pitching staff, and we're going to figure this out. And that's when the core 4-ish with Bernie, that's when they kind of all came together. Because now they were all a little bit older. Like you're like in 96, it was Jeter's first year. 96 was Pettit's first year. And then now all of a sudden you're 26, 27 years old. And now you're the leaders in 2000. And there was nothing stopping those guys just to get it all done. And they made it look pretty easy against the Mets team that was Mike Piazza led, and who else was on that team that had Al Leiter, who's a Yankee broadcaster now. Leiter started game 1, I think, for the Yankees or for the Mets, sorry, and they just weren't a matchup for that franchise against the Yankees.
Talking about that World Series here. To me, they looked so intimidated. I remember why it was a 5-game series, but it reminded me, you talk about the Red Wings and when they played the Carolina Hurricanes. I mean, it was like men playing with boys. I'm sorry. I know they had the scrum and all of that. I get it. And, but no, to me, the Mets weren't in their league.
Well, and that's the thing is like you and I never played professional sports, but you see body language. And when you look at the other team, we're like, we don't have a hope in hell. Like we're not. And like even what was actually funny, because I remember the very last out, Piazza was the last out of that World Series. He drove, like he hit it hard up Mariano, and Mariano's head, he got whiplash still from this to this day. Look at that thing, because he thought it went out, but it was one of those things. It didn't go, and Bernie was there in center field, caught it about 20 feet short of the wall. But the way because you remember how Piazza used to swing the bat, like it was massive.
Yeah.
crack and loud and big swings, the whole bit. And that was just the thing. It didn't go anywhere because Mariano was so good. I don't like. I watched the other day. He was talking about on Old Timers Day about Mariano. He says I had one pitch and I did it really well. It wasn't really well. It was perfection almost. And he just
it was.
How like, it's odd. He had one pitch that he just did, and Mariano was so money. And you talk about all the home runs and everything else that those teams hit, and the guys they had, and everything else. But that was another key. Like besides Bernie to me, like obviously Mariano, like. He was as close to perfection as you could get when it came out of the bullpen. Like he's like, we're screwed into go 2001, where they actually the next year where they lost to Arizona, one of the greatest World Series ever after the 9/11, the whole thing. But Mariano was just so consistent and for so long, and it was just it's crazy to think how guys. And there's a Netflix documentary coming up or HBO like, on Greg Maddux that I'm really interested in watching about how pitchers and throwers are two different things. And Mariano is one of them, and Greg Maddux is one of them. How they were pitchers, and I'm really interested to watch that and how more guys aren't doing that. They're not getting their third or fourth Tommy John by the time they're 28 years old. Yeah, it's interesting to me.
Well, I want to talk to you about Mariano Rivera, because. You can see a team that is not afraid to make a mistake when they know they got a guy in a bullpen like that or a starting pitcher or whatever. You keep the lead. It's money. I mean, again, I harken back to the year the Tigers won the World Series. They had Willie Hernandez. He was money. I mean, how much the closer means to a ball club. And now that's like the biggest question mark this year in 2024 with a lot of teams. I think the Yankees included.
Well, Holmes has blown 10 so far this year, and it's not it's not September yet, right?
Wow.
So you think what they're battling it out right now with the Baltimore Orioles, but having a guy, and it's got to be tough for a guy coming out of the bullpen in New York when Mariano's got a signature in the bullpen and everything else. And he's still getting compared. Like I said, it's been 11 years since he's pitched there, and you're still getting compared to Mariano. So it's got to be a bit tough. But if the way to shut up the haters is to quit blowing saves. Like that's just the thing, right? But having a guy like Mariano out of the bullpen, or like you said earlier on, like John Wetland in '96, you just kind of knew the game was an 8-inning game, and that means so much because and we've talked about other shows we've done together in the past. The more times you put the game in human beings' hands, the better chance the human beings is going to screw it up, because that's what human beings tend to do, is screw things up. But if you can keep it down to two, maybe three guys every game, not getting the fourth guy, the fifth guy, the sixth guy, you're setting yourself up for disaster, because it's the way it's going to go. And Mariano had that sense of calmness coming out of the bullpen, and the Yankees knew what they were getting night in, night out with him. And it was, as a Yankee fan, you could almost turn the TV off before they started singing New York, New York, because you knew it was almost over. It didn't happen in 2001. We didn't get there, but it's one of those things. And crazy. It's crazy how good that team was, and I hope that the people listening to or watching the show later on are not going to just poo-poo how good that team was because of the money that Steinbrenner spent. But that team was good. Like, it was. You
still had to hit the ball, and you still had to pitch the ball, and you had to catch the ball, and that's I agree with you, because. The
team was so good.
The Red Wing comparison. Oh my God! Yeah, exactly.
They spent dough, but man, oh man, you gotta, and right from the manager on out, like that team it's legendary. It ranks up there in the top how many teams of all time. Like
for sure.
Just for that time frame, and it wasn't just the four guys, the five guys had Bernie in there and everything else, had Paul O'Neill in there, and on it goes. But the manager. I think it gets lost a lot is how Torre was able to manage Steinbrenner as well, not just the guys in the team, because if you're the manager of the Yankees back then, you're like we talked about earlier on. you're half a second away from getting fired at all times. And
Yeah.
how Torrey was able to manage that situation in the background is remarkable in itself. No,
That's
it
what makes him one
it
of
was
the,
a great era of baseball. It was fantastic. Yeah.
that's what makes him one of the best managers of all time. Brent, we've got about 4 minutes left. I want to fast forward to this year, 2024. A Yankee that, in my opinion, is going to break the legit home run record. And he's already got it with 62. And we could spend another 2 hours on a show. But Aaron Judge is doing it again, and he's doing something for the history books, potential triple crown.
It's unbelievable. Like the way he, like the last week and a half, 2 weeks, you're like, what the heck's going on? And you got to think that the acquisition of Soto doesn't hurt. So now the Yankees going to overpay to get Soto again. Because the protection he has in the lineup, you see him pitch to hit, but it's not even that, Lou. He's driving the ball. He sees it well. And what I like about him, he hits a home run. He's an aw shucks kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like even yesterday when he hit his second of the day to get to 51, the Yankees, they were trying to get the curtain call, and he was an aw shucks kind of guy. And it's like, I don't want to, but they put him out there, and he's doing something we've only seen 4 other times. He had 350 home run seasons. And it's only been done 3 times. There was 1-4 and a guy by the name of Babe Ruth, and that's pretty good company. So you get in there, and he's got 300 home runs, the fastest to 300 in history. He's already an all-timer. Like if something were to happen to him tomorrow, got knock on the old proverbial wood, he's probably already going to the Hall of Fame. The thing is, as bad as this sounds, he's got to be on a team that wins one. And that's the thing. Like that's the thing about baseball is that it's a team sport built on individual stats, because it's pitcher against hitter. Yeah. And if you don't win one and get your team over the finish line, then well, what did you do? Like who's Sammy Sosa? Who's Mark McGuire? Like who are these guys, right? But Judge is one of those guys. I think he's the Yankees can pull one off, and they got a good team. Like they're not great. They got a really good team. If they can fall into some reliever here and there, and Mariano Incarnate can come out of the woodwork somehow, you never know. But no, like with Soto, is such a great player. And then if Stanton can stay kind of healthy and just get one more year out of him and an at bat here and there, and are they great? Well, I don't know. They're real good. But they got the best record, and that's the thing about being a Yankee fan. Like they're real good, but how much faith do you have in them?
Well, is there a great team? We got 60 seconds left. Is there a great team? There you go.
No, there really isn't. Like you think about, like you say that you talked about the Dodgers earlier on. I think was on your show or a different one I was on. My thought about what to win the World Series was the Houston Astros, and then I looked like an idiot about 2 months ago, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, geez, look at them now.
Boy.
Like that's the thing. They have a window that's closing.
Yep.
So they went out and made some acquisitions. They went and got Kikuchi, who's not a great pitcher, but he might get you 4 or 5 starts and win you a couple games in the playoffs. He might. And I think the Yankees are right there. I think the Dodgers are right there. I think that Arizona's right there. But I think the Houston Astros, look out, like they're, and I hate saying it because, but
I hear you. Well, hey, that's going to do it. This hour has flown by, as it always does when we get Brent Radlinsky from the 1420 Sports Bar podcast coming on and talking baseball. So again, the New York Yankees, a dynasty of the 90s and right into 2000, I guess, the decade. Brent, as always, thanks for being on the show. And
thank you, Lou. I always love talking, especially talking baseball. I love it.
All right. Well, again, that's going to do it for another edition of Captain Lou's Champions of Sports History here on 12 Ounce Sports and Dingo TV, channel 217. We thank you for bringing us into your household tonight. And we'll close by saying, keep your heads up, keep your sticks down, keep your feet moving, and as always, keep your minds open. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Have fun.